She was crying alone in the office, but the CEO heard everything and made a decision no one expected. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The elevator groaned as it climbed to the 32nd floor, each mechanical wheeze matching the exhaustion settling into Madeline Johnson's bones. Monday mornings hit different when you'd spent Sunday night calculating which bill could wait another week and which creditor might actually follow through on their threats. She clutched her travel mug tighter, the coffee inside already lukewarm despite leaving the house only 20 minutes ago. Everything felt lukewarm these days. Her coffee, her hope, her 8-year-old son Tyler's enthusiasm for the cereal they'd eaten for dinner again last night. The elevator doors slid open to reveal the pristine marble lobby of Campbell & Associates. Even after 2 years working here, the opulence still made her stomach clench. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect light over furniture that probably cost more than her annual rent. The company's success gleamed from every surface, a constant reminder of the distance between her world and theirs. "Morning, Maddie." Sarah from reception waved without looking up from her computer screen. "You're early again." Traffic was light. Madeline forced a smile, though early had nothing to do with traffic and everything to do with Tyler's school breakfast program. Free meals meant stretching her grocery budget another day. She settled at her desk in the administrative pool, a sea of cubicles housing the machinery that kept Campbell & Associates running. Her workspace was neat, functional, a framed photo of Tyler at his school science fair, a small succulent that somehow survived despite her brown thumb, and a stack of invoices waiting for approval stamps. The morning routine began. Emails, scheduling, filing, the endless dance of corporate administration. Her fingers moved automatically across the keyboard while her mind wandered to the envelope tucked in her purse. Final notice. The words burned behind her eyes every time she blinked. Johnson. Margaret Wheeler, the office manager, materialized beside her desk like smoke given form. Conference room 3 needs set up for the 10 o'clock meeting. Full spread, coffee, pastries, the works. Of course. Madeline stood, smoothing her skirt. The fabric was showing wear at the seams, but it was professional enough to pass inspection. In the supply room, she gathered materials for the meeting setup, calculating in her head as she worked. Tyler needed new shoes. His toes were cramped in his current pair. Though he hadn't complained, he never complained, her little soldier. The grocery money was running thin, and the car was making that grinding noise again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tyler's school. Reminder, field trip permission, slips and payment due Wednesday. $25. It might as well be $25,000. The conference room transformation took 40 minutes. Fresh flowers from the lobby arrangement, precisely arranged pastries, coffee that cost more per pound than she spent on groceries in a week. She stood back, surveying her work, when voices approached from the hallway. The quarterly numbers look solid, but we need to push harder on the West Coast expansion. The voice was deep, authoritative. Charles Campbell himself. Madeline had seen him from afar, of course. Hard to miss the man who owned half of downtown Seattle. She gathered her supplies quickly, head down, aiming for invisible. Executives barely registered administrative staff. They looked through them like furniture. "Excuse me." The voice stopped her at the door. Madeline turned, finding herself face to face with Charles Campbell. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that seemed to actually see her. "The setup looks perfect, thank you." "You're welcome, Mr. Campbell." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He nodded, already turning toward his colleagues, but something made him pause. "You're Madeline Johnson, right?" "From the administrative pool." Heat flooded her cheeks. Had she made a mistake? Missed something important? Yes, sir. You've been doing excellent work. Margaret mentioned your attention to detail. His smile was brief, but genuine. Keep it up. He moved past her into the conference room, leaving Madeline standing in the hallway with her cleaning supplies and a strange flutter in her chest. When was the last time someone in authority had noticed her work? Really noticed, not just to point out errors or pile on additional tasks. Back at her desk, she tried to focus on the invoices, but her mind kept drifting to those few seconds of recognition. It was foolish, really. A powerful man acknowledging her existence for 30 seconds shouldn't matter this much. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Madeline Johnson? The voice was clipped, professional, cold. Yes. This is regarding your outstanding balance with Premier Credit Services. We need to discuss immediate payment arrangements. The flutter in her chest died, replaced by the familiar weight of anxiety. Monday mornings hit different, all right? But some Mondays hit harder than others. Charles Campbell had built his empire on the principle that small gestures often yielded the largest returns. A handwritten thank you note to a client, remembering an assistant's birthday, learning the names of security guards and cleaning staff. His mother had taught him that kindness was never wasted, though she probably hadn't imagined he'd apply the lesson to corporate strategy. He stood at his office window, watching Seattle wake up 32 floors below. The coffee in his hand was perfect. His assistant Emma knew exactly how he liked it, but his thoughts kept drifting to Madeline Johnson's face in the conference room doorway. There had been something fragile there, quickly masked but unmistakable to someone who'd learned to read people for a living. The Morrison contract came through. Emma appeared in his doorway, tablet in hand. Legal wants to review the liability clauses, but we should have signatures by Friday. Good. He turned from the window. Emma, what do you know about Madeline Johnson? Emma's eyebrows rose slightly. From admin, she's been here about 2 years. Reliable, efficient. Margaret speaks highly of her work. Personal situation. Single mother. Has a young son. Emma's expression grew carefully neutral. Is there a problem? No problem. Just curious about our people. He settled behind his desk, but the conversation felt unfinished. What about her background? How did she end up here? Emma consulted her tablet, though Charles suspected she already knew the answer. His assistant made it her business to know everything about everyone in the building. Previous experience in administrative work, solid references. She interviewed well. Margaret mentioned she was professional but seemed motivated by necessity rather than ambition, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. Charles had seen that particular hunger before, in his own mirror, during the lean years when Campbell and Associates existed only in his imagination and a shared office space in Belltown. She's here because she needs the job, not because she wants the career. That would be my assessment. Emma hesitated. May I ask why you're interested? Charles picked up a pen, rolling it between his fingers. My mother used to say that how we treat people who can't do anything for us reveals who we really are. Your mother was a wise woman. She was. He set the pen down. Make sure HR knows I want to be informed about any issues with employee welfare, not disciplinary problems, financial hardships, family emergencies, that sort of thing. Emma made a note. Of course. Anything specific you're looking for? People falling through cracks. We're profitable enough to make sure our employees aren't choosing between groceries and rent. After Emma left, Charles tried to focus on the Morrison contract, but his concentration kept splintering. The memory of Madeline's carefully maintained composure nagged at him. He'd built his fortune reading between lines, and everything about her screamed quiet desperation professionally disguised. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Campbell, Margaret Wheeler is here about the quarterly administrative review. Send her in. Margaret entered with her usual brisk efficiency, arms full of folders and performance evaluations. She settled across from his desk like a general preparing battle plans. "Overall, we're running smoothly," she began, spreading papers between them. "Productivity is up 3% from last quarter, and we've had minimal turnover." They reviewed numbers, discussed workflow improvements, analyzed departmental efficiency. Charles half listened until Margaret mentioned Madeline's name. "She's one of our strongest performers, never misses deadlines, volunteers for overtime when needed, and other staff respect her work." Margaret paused. "Though I've noticed she seems stressed lately. More so than usual." "Stressed how?" "Little things. Checking her phone more frequently, skipping lunch breaks. Last week, I saw her in the parking garage after hours, sitting in her car with her head in her hands." Margaret's expression softened. "I've been in management long enough to recognize the signs of someone drowning quietly." Charles leaned back in his chair. "What would you recommend?" "Hard to say without knowing specifics. Could be health issues, family problems, financial trouble. Single mothers face pressures most of us can't imagine." "If it were financial, what options would she have?" Margaret considered this. Officially, she could request an advance on her salary, though we rarely approve those. Apply for the Employee Assistance Program, but that's mainly counseling services, unofficially. She shrugged. "Nah, hope someone notices and cares enough to help." After Margaret left, Charles sat alone with her words echoing in his mind. Hope someone notices and cares enough to help. He'd built his career on strategic decisions, calculated risks, and measurable outcomes. But his mother's voice whispered beneath the corporate logic, kindness is never wasted. He picked up his phone and dialed Emma's extension. "I want you to put together a discretionary fund for employee assistance. Start with 50,000, and Emma, I want to know if anyone in this building is genuinely struggling. Not tomorrow, not next week, today." Some small gestures, Charles had learned, required immediate action. The office felt different after 6 o'clock. Fluorescent lights hummed in the empty corridors, and the usual bustle of productivity gave way to an almost church-like quiet. Madeline preferred it this way. Fewer eyes tracking her movements, fewer forced smiles required to maintain professional appearances. She'd volunteered for the late data entry project, partly because the overtime pay would help with groceries, but mostly because Tyler was at her neighbor Mrs. Chen's house until 8. The elderly woman had offered to watch him after school when Madeline's childcare arrangements fell through, refusing payment with the gentle insistence that came from understanding hardship firsthand. Her desk lamp created a small island of light in the darkened administrative pool. Around her, empty cubicles stood like monuments to the 9-to-5 world she couldn't quite afford to inhabit properly. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in steady rhythm, inputting client data with the mechanical precision of someone whose mind was elsewhere. The envelope in her purse seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. She'd read the notice 3 times during lunch, though the words hadn't changed. 60 days. That's how long she had before eviction proceedings began. 2 months to find $800 she didn't have, plus late fees that grew like cancer. Her phone buzzed. "Tyler. Mom. When are you coming home?" "Soon, sweetheart. Are you being good for Mrs. Chen?" "Yeah. She's teaching me to make dumplings. Did you know you have to fold them exactly right or they fall apart?" Despite everything, Madeline smiled. "Is that so?" She says it's like life. You need the right pressure in the right places or everything spills out. Tyler's 8-year-old wisdom delivered with complete seriousness. "Mom, are you okay?" "You sound different." "I'm fine, baby. Just tired. I'll be home in a couple hours." "Okay, I love you. I love you too." She hung up and stared at the phone screen until it went dark, seeing her reflection in the black surface. When had she gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around her eyes? The data entry project stretched ahead of her. Another hour, maybe two if she was careful about accuracy. Her back ached from the cheap office chair, and her stomach reminded her that she'd skipped lunch again to save money. The vending machine coffee tasted like burnt water, but it was free and caffeinated. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Security making rounds, probably. She hunched lower over her keyboard, hoping to avoid conversation. Night security guards were usually chatty, lonely people looking for human connection during empty hours. But the footsteps stopped at the administrative pool entrance. Working late, Madeline looked up to find Charles Campbell silhouetted in the doorway. Even at this hour, his suit looked perfect, though his tie was loosened and his sleeves rolled up. The sight of him here, in her space after hours, made her heart stutter. "Mr. Campbell." She started to stand. "Please, don't get up." He stepped into the pool, hands in his pockets. "And there was finishing some work upstairs and saw the lights. You're here awfully late." "Overtime project, data entry for the Henderson account." He nodded, moving closer to her desk. Up close, she could see fatigue around his eyes, the kind that came from too many 16-hour days and too much responsibility. "That's a big project. You're handling it alone." "I volunteered." The words came out more defensive than she'd intended. "I mean, the overtime is helpful, and I work efficiently in quiet environments." "I'm sure you do." His tone was gentle, almost careful. "But it's nearly 7 o'clock. When do you plan to head home?" "Soon." The lie came easily. She had at least 2 more hours of work ahead, but admitting that felt like confessing to inadequacy. Charles glanced at her desk, taking in the empty coffee cup, the stack of files, the methodical organization of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. His gaze lingered on the framed photo of Tyler. "Your son?" "Tyler. He's 8. He looks like you, same smile." Charles seemed to consider something, then asked, "Is he home alone while you're working late?" "No, my neighbor watches him." Heat crept up her neck. Did he think she was irresponsible, neglectful? "Mrs. Chen is wonderful with children. She used to be a teacher. That's good. It's important to have people you can trust." An awkward silence settled between them. Madeline couldn't read his expression. Was this small talk, or was she in trouble for some infraction she hadn't recognized? "Well," Charles said finally, "I should let you get back to work." But Madeline? The use of her first name sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Don't stay too much longer. The Henderson account will be here tomorrow." He was halfway to the elevator before she found her voice. "Mr. Campbell, thank you." He turned back, eyebrows raised. "For asking about Tyler, not many people." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Everyone should have someone who asks," he said simply. And then he was gone. Charles Campbell's penthouse apartment was a monument to success and solitude. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Elliott Bay, designer furniture arranged with magazine precision, and not a single photograph or personal item to suggest someone actually lived there. He'd purchased the space 5 years ago, seduced by the promise of luxury, but lately it felt more like an expensive hotel room where he happened to sleep. He loosened his tie as he poured 2 fingers of scotch, the same ritual that marked the end of most workdays. The liquid burned pleasantly as he settled into his leather chair, but his mind refused to quiet. Madeline Johnson's face lingered in his thoughts, the careful way she'd held herself during their conversation, the defensive pride when she'd mentioned volunteering for overtime. The Henderson account data entry was tedious work, typically distributed among several employees over a week. For one person to volunteer for the entire project meant either exceptional dedication or desperate need for extra income. Given what Emma had shared about Madeline's personal situation, Charles suspected the latter. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother's name, David. "Charlie, you sound thrilled to hear from me." David's voice carried its usual mixture of affection and exasperation. "When's the last time you had dinner with actual humans instead of client meetings? I eat with humans. Business meals don't count. I'm talking about real conversation, maybe even some laughs. Remember laughs?" Charles smiled despite himself. David was 2 years younger but had appointed himself the keeper of his older brother's social life, a thankless job that mostly involved criticism and unsolicited advice. "I laugh." "When?" "At quarterly reports. Those can be amusing if the numbers are particularly bad. See, this is what I'm talking about." David's tone shifted to serious. "Mum's been gone 3 years, Charlie. She wouldn't want you living like a monk in an expensive tower." Their mother's death had carved a hollow space in Charles's chest that seemed to expand rather than heal with time. Margaret Campbell had been the heart of their small family, the one who insisted on Sunday dinners and holiday traditions, who remembered birthdays and asked about their feelings with relentless maternal determination. "I'm not living like a monk." "When's the last time you went on a date?" Charles considered this. "I took Rebecca Morrison to the symphony last month." "A client?" "That was business with classical music. She enjoyed herself." "Did you?" The question hung in the air. Charles had spent the evening calculating how to secure the Morrison account while making polite conversation about Brahms and real estate markets. Enjoyment hadn't entered the equation. "I enjoyed closing the deal." "Christ, Charlie!" David's frustration was palpable. "You're 45 years old. You've got more money than you can spend, a company that runs itself, and the emotional availability of a filing cabinet. Filing cabinets are very reliable. They're also empty." After the call ended, Charles sat in his pristine living room, surrounded by expensive silence. David's words stung because they carried truth. When had success become such a solitary pursuit? When had achievement replaced connection? He thought about Madeline again, working alone under fluorescent lights, while her son learned to make dumplings with a neighbor. There had been something in her eyes, a fierce protectiveness mixed with bone-deep weariness that spoke to him in ways he couldn't quite name. His laptop sat on the coffee table, and almost without conscious decision, he opened it and navigated to the company's employee database. Madeline Johnson's file was sparse but illuminating. Hired 2 years ago, consistent performance reviews, no disciplinary actions. Previous employment showed a gap of nearly 2 years before she joined Campbell and Associates, a gap that likely corresponded with Tyler's early childhood. Her salary was decent for administrative work, but hardly generous, especially for a single mother in Seattle. The city's cost of living had skyrocketed in recent years, pricing out teachers, social workers, and countless others whose work was essential but undervalued. He closed the laptop and returned to his scotch, but the numbers haunted him. How did someone manage rent, utilities, groceries, childcare, and all the hidden expenses of raising a child on $38,000 a year? The answer was simple: carefully, constantly, and probably not well. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "The measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, Charles. It's what he does with what he has when someone else needs it more." Margaret Campbell had lived that philosophy, volunteering at food banks and homeless shelters, even when money was tight in their own household. She'd understood something Charles was only beginning to grasp, that true wealth came from connection, from seeing others and choosing to care. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Emma's contact information. It was after 9 o'clock, but his assistant was accustomed to odd-hour communications. The text was brief. Need complete financial picture for discretionary assistance program. Start with single parents. Tomorrow morning. Some decisions, Charles had learned, couldn't wait for business hours. 3 days later, Madeline was back in the office well past normal hours, but this time wasn't by choice. The Henderson account had revealed discrepancies that required immediate attention, and Margaret had asked her to stay late to resolve them before the morning client meeting. Tyler was at Mrs. Chen's again, probably learning another life lesson through cooking metaphors. The administrative pool felt like a ghost town. Even the cleaning crew had finished their rounds, leaving behind the lingering scent of industrial disinfectant and the hollow echo of empty spaces. Madeline's desk lamp cast harsh shadows across spreadsheets and invoices, numbers that needed to align but stubbornly refused to cooperate. Her phone rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. The number was familiar now. Premier Credit Services had become as regular as clockwork in their harassment. "Hello? Ms. Johnson, this is Bradley from Premier Credit. I've been trying to reach you regarding your delinquent account." Madeline glanced around the empty office, ensuring her privacy. "I told you last week that I'm working on payment arrangements. Working on arrangements isn't the same as making payments. Your account is now 90 days past due. We're authorized to begin collection proceedings." Her hands trembled as she gripped the phone. What does that mean exactly? Wage garnishment, asset seizure. We can also contact your employer directly about your financial obligations. The threat hit like ice water. If Campbell and Associates learned about her debts, if they questioned her reliability or professionalism, she'd lose the only steady income she had. "Please don't contact my employer. I can make a payment next week. I promise." "How much?" She did quick math in her head. Groceries, Tyler's school supplies, the car payment due Monday, $200. Bradley's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Ms. Johnson, your total balance with fees is now $3,700. $200 doesn't even cover the interest charges." "Then what do you want from me?" The words came out louder than intended, echoing off the empty cubicle walls. "I'm a single mother working full-time. I don't have family money or secret accounts. I pay what I can when I can. We want the full balance. And we want it now. I don't have $3,700. Her voice cracked, professional composure finally fracturing. "If I had that kind of money, don't you think I would have paid you already?" "That's not our problem, Ms. Johnson. It's my problem every single day." Tears burned behind her eyes, months of accumulated stress and fear pouring out in whispered desperation. "I lie awake at night wondering how I'm going to keep a roof over my son's head. I skip meals so he can eat. I buy his clothes at thrift stores and tell him they're vintage so he won't feel different from his classmates." Her voice dropped to a broken whisper. "I work 50-hour weeks and still can't make ends meet. I haven't bought new clothes for myself in 2 years. My car sounds like it's dying, but I can't afford repairs. And you want me to just produce thousands of dollars because you say so. Ms. Johnson, I'm trying my best." Tears flowed freely now, months of suppressed anguish finally finding voice. "I'm trying so hard, but it's never enough. Every month, I fall a little further behind. Every bill becomes a choice between necessities, and Tyler deserves better than this constant fear." She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her chest. "I'll call you back tomorrow," Bradley said, his tone marginally softer. "Maybe we can work something out." The line went dead. Madeline set her phone down with shaking hands and buried her face in her palms, letting the tears fall without resistance. The empty office seemed to amplify her crying, each sob echoing off walls that had witnessed countless professional triumphs and failures, but rarely such raw, personal devastation. She cried for the 8-year-old boy who deserved stability and security. She cried for the dreams she'd abandoned when Tyler was born, for the future that seemed to narrow with each passing month. She cried for the woman she'd been before single motherhood taught her that love and determination weren't always enough. "Excuse me." The voice came from the entrance to the administrative pool. Madeline's head snapped up, horror flooding through her as she saw Charles Campbell standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his presence felt like the final humiliation of an already devastating evening. "Mr. Campbell." She wiped her eyes frantically, trying to resurrect professional dignity. "I'm sorry, the Henderson account had some issues, and Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern instead of professional courtesy, nearly broke her completely. "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie transparent even to her own ears. Charles stepped into the pool, his footsteps soft on the industrial carpet. No, he said quietly. "You're not." And in that moment, Madeline Johnson realized that sometimes being seen, truly seen, was both salvation and surrender. Charles Campbell had witnessed many things in his corporate career: hostile takeovers, boardroom betrayals, the quiet desperation of executives losing their empires. But nothing had prepared him for the raw vulnerability of Madeline Johnson breaking apart in an empty office, her whispered confessions echoing in the darkness like prayers to an indifferent universe. He stood at the edge of the administrative pool, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. Every instinct told him to give her privacy, to pretend he hadn't witnessed this moment of complete exposure. But something deeper, his mother's voice, perhaps, or simple human decency, kept his feet planted on the industrial carpet. "I should go," Madeline whispered, already gathering papers with trembling hands. "I'm sorry you had to see that. It won't happen again." "Wait." The word came out more forceful than he'd intended. Charles stepped closer, his mind racing through possibilities and protocols. "What you just went through, that phone call, that happens often." Madeline's laugh was bitter. "Often enough." "Debt collectors?" She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Medical bills, mostly. Tyler had pneumonia last winter, and the hospital visits. Even with insurance, the costs were overwhelming." Charles felt something tighten in his chest. Tyler, the boy in the photograph with Madeline's smile and 8-year-old innocence. How many children suffered because their parents couldn't navigate the labyrinth of American healthcare and employment? "How much do you owe?" The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Madeline's professional instincts warred with her desperation, while Charles found himself genuinely wanting to know, to understand the scope of her struggle. "You don't have to tell me," he added quickly. $3,700. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "With fees and interest, it keeps growing. I make payments when I can, but it's never enough to actually reduce the balance." Charles did the math automatically. $3,700 was what he spent on a single business dinner at Le Bernardin. It was a weekend trip to Napa, a decent bottle of wine from his collection, a rounding error in his quarterly taxes. And the debt collector threatened to contact your employer. They can garnish wages, apparently, and if Campbell and Associates questions my financial responsibility. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Job loss would transform manageable poverty into complete catastrophe. "That won't happen," Charles said with quiet certainty. "I can guarantee that won't happen." Something in his tone made Madeline look up, studying his face in the harsh light of her desk lamp. "You can't know that." "Actually, I can." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I have some influence with company policy." It was a massive understatement, but something about the moment demanded understatement rather than revelation. Madeline needed reassurance, not the additional pressure of knowing she'd just confessed her deepest vulnerabilities to the man who signed her paychecks. "You should go home," Charles continued. "The Henderson account can wait until tomorrow. But the morning meeting, I'll handle it." He moved to her desk, began gathering the scattered papers with efficient movements. "Tyler's probably wondering where you are. Mrs. Chen said she'd keep him until 9, but—" Madeline glanced at her watch, then at Charles, organizing her work with the same precision he probably brought to million-dollar deals. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." Their hands brushed as she reached for her purse, and for a moment, both froze. The contact was brief, accidental, but it carried an electric awareness that neither had expected. Charles felt the calluses on her fingertips, evidence of work that extended far beyond office hours, while Madeline noticed the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of hands that had never known real uncertainty. "Thank you," she said softly, for treating this like something shameful. There's nothing shameful about struggling to take care of your family." Charles walked her to the elevator, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. As the doors closed on Madeline's tired but grateful smile, he stood alone in the empty hallway, his mind already working through possibilities. Back in his office, he opened his laptop and pulled up employee records again. Madeline's salary, her benefits, her performance reviews, all the data points that reduced a human life to corporate metrics. But now he also knew about Tyler's pneumonia, about skipped meals and thrift store clothes disguised as vintage finds. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Marcus, it's Charles Campbell. I need a favor." Marcus Rodriguez was a private investigator Charles had used for corporate due diligence, discreet, thorough, and ethically flexible when the situation demanded it. "I need you to pay off a debt, anonymously. Make it look like an accounting error, an insurance reimbursement, anything that won't raise questions." "How much are we talking about?" Charles quoted the figure Madeline had whispered in the darkness. "That's it, Charlie. You spend more than that on lunch." That's exactly the point. Some problems, Charles had learned, were too small for their victims to solve, but small enough for others to fix quietly. Madeline's Tuesday morning began like every other. Tyler's ritualistic negotiation about breakfast, cereal choices, the frantic search for his missing homework folder, and the delicate dance of getting them both ready while preserving their collective dignity. But when she checked her phone during the drive to drop Tyler at school, everything changed. Mom, you're making that face again," Tyler observed from the back seat, his 8-year-old radar finely tuned to maternal stress signals. "What face?" "The one where your eyebrows scrunch up and you look like you're trying to solve a really hard math problem in your head." Madeline glanced in the rearview mirror at her son, who was studying her with the unsettling perception that children sometimes possessed. "I'm just thinking about work stuff." "Is work stuff why you were crying last night when you thought I was asleep?" The question hit like a physical blow. She'd been so careful to maintain normalcy, to shield Tyler from the weight of their financial struggles, but children noticed everything. "Sometimes grown-ups have worries, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything terrible is happening, but you're not telling me what the worries are about." Madeline pulled into the school drop-off line, buying herself time to formulate an answer that was honest without being terrifying. "Remember when you had that really hard science project and you weren't sure if you could finish it on time?" "Yeah." "Well, grown-ups have projects too. Money projects, work projects, making sure we have everything we need projects. And sometimes those projects feel really big and scary." Tyler considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important conversations. "But you figured out my science project. You always figure things out." "I try my best. And Mrs. Chen says that trying your best is all anyone can do. And the universe has a way of helping people who help themselves. From the mouths of babes, filtered through the wisdom of an elderly neighbor who'd survived more hardships than Madeline could imagine, Mrs. Chen is very smart. She also says you're the strongest person she knows, even if you don't believe it yourself. After dropping Tyler off, Madeline sat in the school parking lot and finally opened the email that had arrived at 6:23 a.m. The sender was Premier Credit Services, and her finger hovered over the screen for a full minute before she found the courage to read it. Dear Ms. Johnson, we are writing to inform you that your account balance with Premier Credit Services has been satisfied in full due to an insurance reimbursement claim processed through your healthcare provider's supplemental coverage program. This reimbursement covered all outstanding charges related to claim Nodria 4847 2019 MJ-DI, including accumulated fees and interest. Your account is now current with a zero balance. Please retain this email for your records. Madeline read the message 3 times before the words began to penetrate. Zero balance. Account satisfied. Insurance reimbursement. Her hand shook as she called the customer service number listed in the email signature. Premier Credit Services. This is Jennifer. How can I help you? This is Madeline Johnson. I received an email about my account, and I need to verify. Let me pull up your file. The sound of typing filled the pause. Yes, Ms. Johnson. Your account shows a zero balance as of this morning. The insurance payment was processed overnight. But I don't understand. I never filed for supplemental coverage. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Insurance companies sometimes process claims retroactively, especially for medical emergencies involving children. The reimbursement covered the full balance of $3,742. The exact amount, down to the penny. Madeline sat in her car outside Tyler's school, staring at the email through tears that felt different from the ones she'd shed the night before. These weren't tears of desperation or defeat. They were tears of disbelief, of gratitude so profound it felt almost spiritual. Her phone rang. Mrs. Chen. Madeline, dear, Tyler forgot his lunch again. Should I bring it to school, or will he survive on whatever they're serving in the cafeteria today? Mrs. Chen, the strangest thing just happened. She found herself explaining the insurance reimbursement, the sudden resolution of months of anxiety, the inexplicable timing of it all. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd learned that life's surprises came in many forms. You know what I think, Mrs. Chen said when Madeline finished. I think the universe was listening to your tears last night. Sometimes, when we're brave enough to admit we can't carry everything alone, help arrives in unexpected ways. But insurance doesn't work like this. Companies don't just discover money they owe you and pay it without being asked. Maybe not, Mrs. Chen agreed. But angels work in mysterious ways, and sometimes they wear the disguise of corporate bureaucracy. Driving to work, Madeline felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope tempered with cautious relief. The weight that had pressed against her chest for so long had lifted, replaced by an almost giddy sense of possibility. She had no idea that 32 floors above her office, Charles Campbell was learning that some gifts were more satisfying to give than receive. Charles Campbell's Thursday afternoon was a masterclass in controlled efficiency. 3 client calls, 2 contract reviews, and a board meeting that lasted precisely 90 minutes. But his mind kept drifting to the administrative pool 30 floors below, where Madeline Johnson was presumably working with one less weight on her shoulders. Marcus Rodriguez had confirmed the debt resolution Tuesday evening with characteristic professionalism. Clean as a whistle, he'd reported. Insurance reimbursement looks completely legitimate. Your employee will never know the difference. Now, 2 days later, Charles found himself manufacturing reasons to walk past the administrative pool, coffee from the break room instead of Emma's perfectly prepared cup, reports he could have requested digitally but preferred to collect in person, meetings that took him past the elevator bank at precisely the time Madeline typically took her lunch break. It was pathetic, really. A 45-year-old CEO conducting surveillance on his own employee like a teenager with a crush. "You're distracted today." Emma appeared in his doorway with a stack of contracts and an expression that suggested she'd been observing his unusual behavior. "Everything all right?" "Fine. Just thinking through some strategic initiatives." Strategic initiatives that require frequent trips to the 32nd floor. Charles looked up from his computer screen, meeting Emma's knowing gaze. His assistant had worked for him for 7 years, long enough to recognize when his usual patterns shifted. "I'm considering expanding our employee wellness programs." Ah, Emma settled into the chair across from his desk. Employee wellness. That explains the sudden interest in administrative staff scheduling and the questions about single-parent support services. "I want to make sure we're taking care of our people. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain single mother in the admin pool, would it?" Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Emma's carefully neutral expression. "What makes you ask that?" "Margaret mentioned you've been asking about Madeline Johnson. And yesterday, I noticed you happened to be near the elevators when she was leaving for the day." The observation hung between them like evidence in a trial. Charles had built his career on reading people, but Emma had learned to read him with equal precision. "She's a good employee. I want to make sure good employees feel valued." Of course, Emma's tone suggested she understood more than she was saying. For what it's worth, Margaret says Madeline seems different this week. Lighter, somehow less stressed." "That's good to hear. She's also been working late less frequently, which is probably better for her son." Charles nodded, trying to appear casually interested rather than deeply invested in the details of Madeline's emotional state. "Speaking of her son," Emma continued, "did you know she brings him to the office occasionally? During snow days or when school lets out early, he sits in the corner of Margaret's office and does homework while Madeline finishes up. Here, in the building? Margaret allows it. Company policy technically prohibits it, but she makes exceptions for reliable employees with childcare challenges." An idea began forming in Charles's mind, a way to create legitimate interaction without the awkwardness of manufactured encounters. What about formalizing that? Creating an after-school program for employees, children. Emma raised an eyebrow. That would be progressive and expensive. "We can afford it. Since when do you care about progressive employee benefits?" "Since I realized that supporting our people's families makes good business sense." It was partially true, though Charles suspected his motivations were more personal than he was willing to admit, even to himself. That afternoon, he found himself in the administrative pool again, ostensibly reviewing workflow efficiency with Margaret. The conversation was professional and productive, but his attention kept drifting to Madeline's desk, where she worked with the focused concentration of someone who approached every task as if her livelihood depended on it. "Madeline?" Margaret called her over when their discussion concluded. "Mr. Campbell was asking about our peak work periods and overtime needs." Madeline approached with the careful posture of someone accustomed to authority figures bringing bad news. "Is there a problem with my hours?" "Not at all," Charles said quickly. "Actually, I was hoping to get your perspective on something. You have a son, right?" "Tyler, he's 8. What would you think about an after-school program here in the building? Supervised childcare for employees who need to work late occasionally." Madeline's eyes widened. "That would be incredible, but also expensive." Let me worry about the expense. Would it be useful? It would change everything. The words came out in a rush of genuine excitement. I mean, for parents like me who don't have extended family nearby or who can't afford quality after-school care, the flexibility alone would be... She stopped herself, as if realizing she was revealing too much enthusiasm. It would be professionally beneficial, she finished more carefully. Charles smiled, the first genuinely spontaneous expression he'd worn in days. Then I'll make it happen. Some bridges, he was learning, were built with small gestures that created space for larger possibilities. The Campbell and Associates after-school program launched 3 weeks later with the efficiency that characterized all of Charles's initiatives. A converted conference room on the 31st floor was transformed into a child-friendly space with homework tables, reading corners, and educational activities supervised by licensed childcare professionals. Madeline enrolled Tyler immediately, though she'd insisted on paying the nominal fee despite Charles's preference to make the program completely free. "I want to contribute," she'd told Margaret. "When it's important that Tyler understands nothing worthwhile comes without effort." Charles told himself his visit to the after-school room on Tyler's first day was purely administrative, checking on the program's implementation, ensuring proper supervision, confirming that the investment was sound. He didn't examine too closely why he'd chosen Friday afternoon at precisely 4:30, when Madeline would be collecting her son for the weekend. The room buzzed with the controlled energy of 8 children aged 6 to 12, their voices mixing with the gentle guidance of staff members. Charles paused in the doorway, struck by how natural this felt. Childhood laughter echoing through the building that typically resonated only with corporate ambition and strategic planning. "Are you here to check on the program?" Sarah, the lead childcare coordinator, approached with a warm smile. "Everything's going beautifully. The kids have adapted quickly, and the parents seem relieved to have reliable care." "That's good to hear." Charles scanned the room until his gaze settled on a dark-haired boy hunched over a notebook in the far corner. "How's Tyler adjusting?" "Wonderfully. He's mature for his age, very responsible. And brilliant. He finished his math homework in 15 minutes and asked if we had any extra problems he could work on." Charles moved closer to Tyler's table, drawn by curiosity and something deeper he couldn't name. The boy was absorbed in what appeared to be a creative writing assignment, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, just like his mother when she reviewed invoices. "Tyler?" Sarah's voice was gentle. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Tyler looked up, revealing eyes that were unmistakably Madeline's, warm brown with flecks of gold that caught the light. He studied Charles with the serious assessment children reserved for adults they hadn't categorized yet. "Tyler, this is Mr. Campbell. He owns the company where your mum works." "Oh." Tyler stood politely, extending his hand with formal precision. "Thank you for letting me come here after school. It's much better than staying with Mrs. Chen every day. Not that Mrs. Chen isn't nice," he added quickly, "but she watches soap operas in Chinese, and I can't understand them." Charles shook the small hand, amused by Tyler's diplomatic honesty. "What do you think of the program so far?" "It's really good. The homework help is useful, and Jenny showed me how to use the computer for research." Tyler gestured toward a young woman helping another child. "I'm writing a story about dragons, but I wanted to make sure I got the mythology right." "Dragons, huh? What kind of story?" "Well, most dragon stories are about knights fighting them, but I think that's unfair to the dragons. Maybe they're just misunderstood. Maybe they're actually trying to protect something important, and people assume they're evil because they look scary." The observation was delivered with 8-year-old seriousness, but Charles heard echoes of deeper wisdom, the kind that came from a child who'd learned to see beyond surface appearances. "But that's a very thoughtful perspective." Mom says you should always consider both sides of a story before deciding who's right and who's wrong. Tyler returned to his seat, then looked up again. Are you really the boss of this whole building? I am. That must be a lot of responsibility. Mom says being responsible for other people is the hardest job in the world. Before Charles could respond, Madeline's voice carried across the room. And Tyler, ready to head home. She stopped short when she saw Charles, her professional smile automatically engaging. Mr. Campbell, I didn't expect to see you here. Just checking on the new program. He gestured toward Tyler, who was packing his backpack with methodical care. Your son was telling me about his dragon story. Tyler's always been creative. He gets it from his father. The words slipped out before she could stop them, followed immediately by a flash of regret. I mean, it's okay, Charles said gently. Creativity is a gift, regardless of its source. Tyler finished packing and stood between them, his presence somehow making the moment less awkward and more familial. Mr. Campbell, would you like to read my story when I'm finished? I could email it to you, if you have email. Most grown-ups have email. I'd be honored to read it, and yes, I have email. As they walked toward the elevator together, Tyler chattering about dragons and research methodology, Charles felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about helping an employee anymore. This was about two people, a mother and son, who had somehow become important to him in ways that transcended corporate responsibility. The elevator doors closed on Madeline's grateful smile and Tyler's enthusiastic wave, leaving Charles alone with the realization that some investments paid dividends that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. 3 months into the after-school program, Charles Campbell found himself developing what could generously be called a routine, and what Emma more accurately described as an obsession with the 31st floor. His daily visits had evolved from administrative oversight to genuine involvement, helping with homework questions that stumped the staff, reviewing Tyler's weekly dragon stories, and engaging in surprisingly complex discussions with children whose perspectives often challenged his assumptions. Tyler announced one Thursday afternoon, looking up from a math worksheet, for a really important businessman. You spend a lot of time helping kids with homework. Charles paused in his explanation of long division, struck by the observation. Around them, 6 other children worked quietly, but Tyler's comment carried the weight of someone who noticed patterns. Do you mind me being here? Not at all. I was just wondering why. Tyler's directness was refreshing after a day of corporate diplomacy and carefully worded emails. Most adults only talk to kids when they have to. Maybe I like talking to kids. Why? The simple question deserved an honest answer. Charles considered his response while Tyler waited with patient curiosity. Kids ask better questions than adults. They haven't learned to be afraid of appearing foolish, so they ask about things that really matter. Like what? Like whether dragons might be misunderstood, or why important businessmen spend time helping with homework instead of making money. Tyler grinned, the expression transforming his serious face into something bright and mischievous. Mom says you're very kind. She doesn't think I notice when she talks about work, but I pay attention. What else does your mum say? That you made the after-school program happen really fast, and that you care about your employees like they're actual people instead of just workers. Tyler leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Or she also says you're nothing like what she expected from someone so important. Before Charles could ask what Madeline had expected, footsteps approached their table. He turned to find her standing nearby, holding a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested she'd overheard the conversation. Tyler, what have I told you about repeating private conversations? That I shouldn't. But Mr. And Campbell asked what you said about him, and you always tell me to be honest when adults ask direct questions. Madeline's cheeks flushed pink. Sometimes honesty requires discretion. What's discretion? Knowing when to keep your mouth shut, Charles said with amusement, earning a grateful look from Madeline and an understanding nod from Tyler. Oh, like when Mrs. Chen asks if I like her cooking, and I say yes, even though her dumplings are sometimes soggy. Exactly like that. Madeline set her coffee on the table and settled into the chair beside Tyler, close enough that Charles caught the faint scent of her shampoo, something clean and floral that seemed incongruous with the corporate environment. How's the math homework going? Mr. Campbell explained long division using pizza slices. It makes much more sense now. Tyler demonstrated his newfound understanding with enthusiasm, walking through problems that had frustrated him moments earlier. Charles watched the interaction between mother and son, noting the easy affection, the way Madeline's entire demeanor softened when she focused on Tyler. Here, away from professional obligations and financial pressures, she was simply a mother proud of her child's achievements. He's brilliant, Charles said when Tyler left to show his completed worksheet to Sarah. Really exceptional. He is. Pride and worry warred in Madeline's expression. Sometimes I wonder if he's too serious for his age. He worries about grown-up things, money, work, whether I'm okay. I try to shield him, but children absorb more than we realize. It sounds like he's learned empathy and responsibility. Those aren't bad qualities. No, but childhood should be about wonder and possibility, not anxiety about adult problems. She sighed, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. I want him to believe in dragons and happy endings, not worry about whether we can afford groceries. The comment was casual, conversational, but Charles heard the underlying message. Despite the mysterious insurance reimbursement that had resolved her debt crisis, daily life remained a careful balance of income and expenses. Does he still worry about those things? Less than before. The after-school program has been a godsend. It's given me flexibility to take on additional projects, earn overtime when needed, and knowing he's safe and supervised. She trailed off, then met Charles's gaze directly. Thank you. I know this program exists because you made it happen. It exists because it was needed. By people like me. By families. By children who deserve support while their parents work to provide for them. Tyler returned with his completed worksheet and the announcement that dragons were actually excellent at mathematics because they had to calculate precise measurements for their hordes. Charles found himself thinking that some of the best conversations happened in spaces designed for children, where honesty was expected and pretense seemed unnecessary. Charles Campbell had attended hundreds of corporate events, fundraisers, galas, award ceremonies, where success was measured in donations raised and connections made. But standing in his penthouse apartment on a Friday evening, adjusting his bow tie for the Children's Hospital benefit dinner, he found himself thinking about a different kind of measurement, the space between obligation and genuine desire to help. The Children's Hospital of Seattle held personal significance beyond charitable tax write-offs. His mother had volunteered there for years, reading to young patients during their long treatments. After her death, Charles had established the Margaret Campbell Foundation in her memory, funding pediatric programs and family support services. Tonight's gala would raise money for a new family resource center, counseling services, financial assistance, temporary housing for families dealing with childhood medical crises. The kind of support that might have helped someone like Madeline when Tyler was hospitalized with pneumonia. His phone buzzed with a text from David. Please tell me you're bringing a date to this thing. Mum would haunt us both if you show up alone again. Charles considered the message while Emma's voice echoed from their afternoon conversation. The gala committee always provides escort services for single donors. Very discreet, very professional. professional escorts to make him appear socially well-adjusted. The idea felt both ridiculous and depressing. Another text from David. At least tell me you're not planning to spend the entire evening discussing quarterly projections with other workaholics. The accusation stung because it was accurate. Charles had perfected the art of attending social events without actually being social. Strategic conversations disguised as mingling, networking wrapped in charitable intentions. He poured himself a scotch and moved to the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Somewhere out there, Madeline was probably helping Tyler with weekend homework or reading bedtime stories, creating the kind of warm domesticity that Charles's expensive apartment would never contain. An idea formed, impulsive, potentially inappropriate, but compelling enough to make him reach for his phone before rational thought could intervene. He found Madeline's number in the company directory and hesitated only briefly before calling. "Hello?" Her voice carried the slight breathlessness of someone interrupted mid-activity. "Madeline, this is Charles Campbell. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Mr. Campbell?" "No, not at all. Is everything okay?" He could hear Tyler's voice in the background, asking about dragons and homework, the comfortable chaos of family life that made Charles's pristine apartment feel even more sterile. "Everything's fine. I'm calling about something unusual, and please feel free to say no." He paused, suddenly uncertain about the wisdom of his impulse. "There's a charity gala tomorrow night, the Children's Hospital benefit. I have a table, and I realized I'd like to invite someone who understands the importance of their work." Silence stretched across the connection. Charles could almost hear Madeline processing the invitation, weighing implications and appropriateness. "You're inviting me to a charity gala?" "As my guest, the Children's Hospital has programs that support families dealing with pediatric medical crises. Given your experience with Tyler's pneumonia, I thought you might find their work meaningful." More silence. Then Tyler's voice, clearer now. "Mom, who's on the phone?" "A friend from work, sweetheart. A friend from work." Charles found himself smiling at the designation. "I appreciate the invitation," Madeline said carefully, "but I'm not sure it would be appropriate." "Why not?" "You're my employer. There are professional boundaries, and I'm not sure attending a social event together is—" "Madeline," he interrupted gently, "this isn't about professional hierarchies. It's about two people who care about children's welfare attending an event that supports children's welfare. But I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a charity gala. Those events require formal attire that I simply don't own." Charles had anticipated this objection. The gala committee provides styling services for all attendees. Transportation, attire, everything handled professionally. "You mean like Pretty Woman?" Tyler's voice carried clearly through the phone, followed by Madeline's mortified, "Tyler, go finish your homework." Charles laughed, despite himself. "Less like Pretty Woman, more like ensuring everyone feels comfortable at an important fundraising event." Another pause. He could hear Madeline's internal debate. Curiosity warring with caution, desire battling with professional propriety. Would other employees be there? Some, yes. Margaret Wheeler usually attends with her husband, several department heads. It's not unusual for staff to be included when the cause aligns with their interests. And Tyler? I assume he'd stay with Mrs. Chen. Unless you'd prefer to bring him, the Foundation has sponsored family-friendly events before. No, a formal gala isn't appropriate for an 8-year-old. Madeline's tone had shifted, becoming more thoughtful than defensive. "When would I need to decide?" "Tomorrow morning. The styling appointment would be early afternoon if you choose to attend." "All right. Let me think about it tonight and call you tomorrow." After hanging up, Charles stood in his empty apartment, surprised by how much he wanted her to say yes. Not for networking or professional advancement, but for the simple pleasure of sharing an evening with someone whose perspective he valued. Some invitations, he realized, mattered more than others. Madeline stood before the full-length mirror in the styling suite at Nordstrom, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The deep sapphire gown hugged curves she'd forgotten she possessed, the silk fabric catching light with every movement. Professional makeup had transformed her tired features into something luminous, while her hair was swept into an elegant updo that made her neck appear longer, more graceful. "You look stunning," declared Patricia, the personal stylist who'd spent 3 hours orchestrating this transformation. "Your date is going to be speechless." "He's not my date," Madeline said automatically, though the protest felt increasingly hollow. "This is a professional event." Patricia's knowing smile suggested she'd heard similar denials before. "Of course. Very professional." The afternoon had felt surreal from the moment Charles's driver had collected her from the apartment. Tyler had watched wide-eyed as she'd climbed into the black sedan, his goodbye hug fierce and excited. "You look like a princess, Mom. Take pictures." Now, surrounded by luxury that belonged in magazines rather than her life, Madeline struggled with conflicting emotions. The dress was beautiful, the experience dreamlike, but underneath the glamour lay questions she couldn't ignore. Why had Charles invited her? What did he expect from the evening? And more troubling, what did she hope would happen? "The shoes complete the look perfectly," Patricia continued, adjusting the delicate straps of heels that probably cost more than Madeline's monthly rent. "And the jewelry adds just the right amount of sparkle without overwhelming the neckline." Borrowed diamonds rested against her collarbone, catching light like captured stars. Everything about this transformation spoke of a world where money solved problems effortlessly, where beauty and elegance were commodities that could be purchased and perfected. Her phone buzzed. A text from Charles. "Driver will collect you at 6. Looking forward to the evening?" Looking forward to the evening. Professional courtesy or personal anticipation. The ambiguity made her stomach flutter with nervous energy. Second thoughts? Patricia had observed enough transformations to recognize pre-event anxiety. "I'm not sure I belong at this kind of event." "Because of the money." Madeline nodded, unable to articulate the deeper concerns about crossing lines between professional obligation and personal desire. "Let me tell you something," Patricia said, her tone shifting from professional cheerfulness to genuine warmth. "I've styled women for galas, premieres, award shows, you name it. The ones who worry about belonging, they're usually the ones who deserve to be there most. Why? Because they understand that privilege comes with responsibility. The women who take this for granted never question whether they belong. They just assume the world owes them beautiful things." The observation resonated more than Madeline cared to admit. She'd spent years feeling like an outsider looking in, watching other people navigate social situations with confidence she'd never possessed. "Besides," Patricia continued, "the man who arranged all this clearly believes you belong there. Maybe trust his judgment." At exactly 6 o'clock, Madeline found herself in the back of the sedan again, this time headed toward the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. The city streamed past her window, familiar streets transformed by evening light into something magical and distant. Her phone rang. "Tyler, Mom, Mrs. Chen wants to know if you're really going to meet rich people tonight." "I'm going to a charity fundraiser with my boss and other people from work." "But Mrs. Chen says you look like a movie star. She took pictures while you were walking to the car." The thought of her elderly neighbor documenting this Cinderella moment made Madeline smile despite her nerves. "Tell Mrs. Chen thank you for watching you tonight. I'll be home by midnight." like a real Cinderella story. Something like that. "Mom, are you scared?" The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. A little nervous, maybe. Why? Because Mrs. Chen says being scared of good things is normal when you haven't had many good things. But she also says you deserve good things, even if you don't always believe it. Mrs. Chen's wisdom, delivered through an 8-year-old's clarity, hit deeper than any stylist's reassurance. "I'll remember that, sweetheart. Be good for Mrs. Chen." The sedan pulled up to the Fairmont's entrance, where valets and doormen orchestrated an elegant dance of arrivals. Through the windows, Madeline glimpsed other guests, women in designer gowns, men in perfect tuxedos, the effortless confidence of people accustomed to such evenings. Her phone buzzed with a final text from Charles. "I'm in the lobby. No rush. Take your time." Madeline checked her reflection one more time in the car's window, seeing not the struggling single mother who'd cried in an empty office months ago, but someone stronger. Someone who'd survived pneumonia scares and debt collectors and emerged with dignity intact. Someone who, for one evening at least, belonged exactly where she was. The valet opened her door with professional courtesy, and Madeline stepped into the Seattle evening, ready to discover what good things might be waiting. Charles Campbell had attended enough charity galas to predict their rhythm with clockwork precision: cocktail hour mingling, dinner speeches about worthy causes, auction bidding that revealed more about egos than generosity. But when Madeline Johnson emerged from the elevator into the Fairmont Olympics marble lobby, every familiar pattern dissolved into stunned silence. She was breathtaking. Not just beautiful, though the sapphire gown transformed her into something luminous, but radiant with nervous confidence that made her more compelling than any woman who'd ever taken such transformation for granted. "Madeline." He moved toward her, momentarily forgetting that other people existed in the lobby. "You look different." She touched the diamond necklace at her throat self-consciously. "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life. You look like yourself, only more so." The compliment seemed to surprise her. They stood in the elegant lobby, surrounded by other guests arriving for the gala, but Charles felt the strange sensation that everyone else had become background noise. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, noting how her gloved hand trembled slightly as she accepted it. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an underwater fantasy. Blue lighting, flowing fabric, centerpieces that evoked ocean depths. Round tables surrounded a dance floor where couples would later move to music that cost more per song than most people spent on entertainment in a year. "This is incredible," Madeline whispered as they entered. I had no idea charity events could be so elaborate. The Children's Hospital Board believes that beautiful environments inspire generous donations. They're usually right. Charles guided her toward their table, noting how other guests' gazes lingered on his companion. He felt an unexpected surge of pride, not possessive and exactly, but protective and pleased to be seen with someone whose presence enhanced rather than diminished him. "Charles," Margaret Wheeler approached with her husband Harold in tow, "don't you look handsome? And Madeline, my goodness, you're absolutely stunning." Madeline's smile was genuine but cautious. "Thank you, Margaret. The hospital has done beautiful work with the decorations." "Harold, this is Madeline Johnson from our administrative team." "Madeline, my husband Harold." Harold Wheeler shook Madeline's hand with the courtly manner of someone raised to treat all women with equal respect, regardless of their professional status. "Charles tells me you have personal experience with the Children's Hospital," Harold said. "Your son was treated here. Last winter, pneumonia." "The staff was incredible, not just medically, but emotionally supportive when I was terrified and overwhelmed." "That's exactly why tonight's fundraiser matters so much," Harold replied warmly. Supporting families during medical crises requires resources beyond just clinical care. As they settled at their table, Charles watched Madeline navigate conversations with other guests, a federal judge, a tech entrepreneur, a museum director. She listened more than she spoke, but her questions revealed genuine interest rather than social anxiety. When the pediatric oncology director described new family support programs, Madeline's engagement was immediate and heartfelt. The most challenging aspect isn't always the medical treatment, Dr. Sarah Martinez explained. It's helping families manage the emotional and financial stress that comes with childhood illness. What kind of support makes the biggest difference? Madeline asked. Practical things, often. Transportation assistance, temporary housing for out-of-town families, help with sibling care during long hospital stays. The small details that allow parents to focus on their child's recovery instead of logistical nightmares. Charles noticed Madeline's expression during this conversation, focused intensity that went beyond polite interest. She understood these challenges from personal experience, not abstract charitable concern. During dinner, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Madeline asked thoughtful questions about the Foundation's work, while Charles found himself sharing stories about his mother's volunteer activities that he'd never discussed with business associates. She used to say that hospitals were places where masks came off, he told her, where people showed who they really were under pressure. Tyler was so brave during his hospitalization. Braver than I was, certainly. Madeline's voice carried the mixture of pride and remembered fear that parents knew too well. But I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. That's a lesson that applies beyond medical crises. Yes, it does. Their eyes met across the table, and Charles felt the strange sensation of being seen, really seen, in ways that had nothing to do with his net worth or corporate position. The auction portion of the evening raised impressive sums for hospital programs, but Charles found himself more interested in Madeline's reactions than the bidding wars around them. When a week-long stay at a Napa Valley resort went for $15,000, her small gasp of amazement made him smile. "That's more than some people make in 6 months," she murmured. "It's also funding counseling services for 50 families dealing with childhood cancer diagnoses. I suppose perspective matters." When the band began playing for the evening's dancing portion, Charles stood and extended his hand. "Would you like to dance?" Madeline looked around the ballroom, where couples moved gracefully across the polished floor. "I should warn you, I haven't danced since high school. Then we'll figure it out together." Some moments, Charles realized, were worth the risk of imperfection. The dance floor felt like stepping into a dream where normal rules suspended themselves in favor of something more magical. Charles's hand rested gently on Madeline's waist, while her gloved fingers found his shoulder with tentative grace. The orchestra played something slow and classical. Sinatra, maybe, though Madeline couldn't identify the song through the nervous flutter of her heartbeat. "Relax," Charles murmured, his voice close enough to her ear that she felt his breath warm against her skin. "Just follow my lead." "Easy for you to say? You probably took cotillion lessons." "Actually, I learned to dance at my mother's insistence when I was 16. She said a gentleman should know how to make a woman feel elegant on a dance floor." "Did it work? You tell me." They moved together with surprising synchronization, Charles's lead confident but gentle, never forcing or rushing. Around them, other couples swayed to the music, but Madeline felt as if they existed in a private bubble where only the two of them mattered. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was, strong, compassionate, completely unimpressed by wealth or status. She volunteered here at the hospital for 15 years, reading to children during their treatments. Is that why you established the foundation? Charles nodded, guiding her through a gentle turn that made her dress shimmer under the ballroom lights. She believed that privilege came with responsibility, that having resources meant using them to help others, not just accumulate more. She would be proud of what you've built. I hope so. Though I think she'd be more interested in how I treat people than how much money I've made. The comment carried weight that extended beyond casual conversation. Madeline studied his face, noting the vulnerability that rarely showed during their office interactions. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really invite me tonight? Charles's steps never faltered, but something shifted in his expression. What do you mean? You could have invited anyone, business associates, board members, women from your social circle. Why your employee from the administrative pool? The question hung between them as they continued dancing, other couples moving around them in elegant patterns that seemed choreographed by wealth and social expectation. Because, Charles said finally, you're the only person I know who would ask that question. I don't understand. Most people assume they deserve beautiful experiences. You wonder if you're worthy of them. His hand pressed slightly more firmly against her back, drawing her incrementally closer. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Self-doubt isn't exactly a virtue. Neither is entitlement. And what you call self-doubt, I call perspective. You understand that good things have value precisely because they're not guaranteed. The song shifted to something even softer, more intimate. Madeline became hyper-aware of their proximity, the expensive fabric of his tuxedo beneath her palm, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the ballroom. Charles, I have to ask. She hesitated, unsure how to voice the question that had been building all evening. That insurance reimbursement that paid off my medical debt, that doesn't really happen, does it? Insurance companies don't just discover money they owe you and pay it without being asked. His steps slowed, almost imperceptibly. Why do you ask? Because I've been thinking about the timing. The amount was exact, down to the penny, and it happened right after. She met his eyes directly. Right after you found me crying in the office about debt collectors. They had stopped dancing now, standing still, while other couples continued moving around them. Charles's expression was carefully neutral, but Madeline read confirmation in the slight tension around his eyes. You paid it, she said softly. You paid my debt. Madeline, why? The question came out as a whisper, though it carried the weight of months of confusion and gratitude. Because you needed help, and I could help. But why me? Why go to such elaborate lengths to make it look like insurance? Charles was quiet for a long moment, his hands still holding hers in the dancing position they'd abandoned. Around them, the gala continued, laughter, conversation, the gentle clink of glasses, but their bubble of privacy remained intact. Because, he said finally, watching you struggle with something I could fix with a phone call felt wrong. And because I knew you wouldn't accept help if you knew it came from me. You're right, I wouldn't have. So you're angry? Madeline considered the question, examining her emotions with the same care she brought to financial calculations. Surprise? Yes. Gratitude that felt almost overwhelming. But anger. I should be, she said slowly. But I'm not. She struggled for words. I'm confused about what this means. It means, Charles said, beginning to move again to music they'd temporarily forgotten, that some things matter more than professional boundaries. The evening air on the Fairmont's rooftop terrace carried the salt tang of Elliott Bay and the distant sounds of Seattle's nightlife. Madeline stood at the railing, her borrowed diamonds catching light from the city below, while Charles stood beside her in comfortable silence. They'd escaped the ballroom after the dancing, both needing space to process revelations that had shifted the ground beneath their feet. "I should have told you about the debt," Charles said finally. "I just didn't know how to explain it without sounding like a wealthy man who thought money could solve everything." Something like that. Madeline turned to face him, studying his profile in the soft illumination of the terrace lighting. "The thing is, in this case, money did solve everything. Not just the debt, but the panic, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing my job if creditors contacted the company. I'm glad it helped." "It did more than help, Charles. It gave me back my life." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But it also created complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind where I can't pretend this is just a professional relationship anymore." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Charles turned to face her fully, his expression serious but unreadable. "What would you call it instead?" "I don't know. That's the problem." Madeline wrapped her arms around herself, the evening breeze cool against her bare shoulders. "And in fairy tales, the wealthy prince rescues the struggling woman, and everyone assumes it's romantic. But in real life, it's complicated. There are power dynamics, financial disparities, questions about motives and expectations." "And what do you think my motives are?" The question was direct, challenging, and Madeline realized she'd been avoiding it because the answer frightened her. Initially, kindness. Genuine desire to help someone who needed it. She met his gaze steadily. "But tonight feels different." "How?" "Tonight feels personal." Charles moved closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to notice the slight smile that softened his features. "It is personal, Charles. I know all the reasons this is complicated. I know about power imbalances and professional ethics and the fact that you work for my company. But I also know that I've spent months thinking about you, worrying about you, looking forward to conversations that have nothing to do with quarterly reports or strategic planning." His honesty was disarming, but Madeline forced herself to voice the concerns that had been building all evening. "What happens when this ends?" "Because relationships like this do end, and when they do, I'm the one who loses everything." "Why do you assume it will end badly?" "Because fairy tales don't happen to women like me. I'm a 38-year-old single mother with a high school education and a pile of bills. She gestured toward the city spread below them, as if it belonged to him personally. "You're this. Success, power, options I can't even imagine. You're also intelligent, compassionate, stronger than most people I know, and raising an exceptional child despite circumstances that would have broken lesser people. Pretty words, but they don't change reality." Charles stepped closer still, close enough that Madeline had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "What if reality is more flexible than you think?" Before she could respond, his hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I'm going to kiss you," he said softly. "If you don't want me to, tell me now." Madeline's mind raced through a dozen reasons why this was unwise, unprofessional, potentially catastrophic. But her heart, which had been carefully guarded for years, whispered a different answer. "Charles, tell me no, and I'll step back. We'll go back to the way things were, professional and safe and distant. And if I don't tell you no, then we figure out what comes next together." The choice felt monumental, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no guarantee of where she might land. But looking into Charles's eyes, seeing vulnerability that matched her own, Madeline realized that some risks were worth taking. Instead of answering with words, she rose up on her toes, closing the distance between them with a decisiveness that surprised them both. Their kiss began tentatively, a question posed and answered, but deepened into something that spoke of months of suppressed attraction and careful longing. When they finally separated, both were breathing unsteadily. "Well," Madeline whispered, her forehead resting against his, "I suppose there's no going back now?" "Are you sorry?" She considered the question, thinking about Tyler asleep at Mrs. Chen's house, about the careful life she'd built through sheer determination, about the 1,000 ways this could complicate everything. "Ask me again in the morning," Charles smiled, the expression transforming his face into something boyish and hopeful. "I will." Some bridges, once crossed, changed the landscape forever. Monday morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of alarm clocks and reality checks. Madeline sat in her car outside Campbell and Associates, watching other employees stream into the building while she wrestled with the enormity of what had happened Saturday night. The kiss on the terrace had felt inevitable, romantic, right? Now, facing the marble lobby where professional hierarchies ruled supreme, it felt like temporary insanity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Hope you have a good day at work. Mrs. Chen made extra dumplings for your lunch." The normalcy of the message, Tyler's cheerful optimism, Mrs. Chen's maternal concern, highlighted how dramatically her world had shifted while theirs remained constant. She was still the same single mother who counted grocery money and shopped at thrift stores, but now she was also the woman who'd kissed Charles Campbell under Seattle's starlit sky. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt eternal. Every floor marked a return to the structured world where she was administrative staff and he was the CEO, where their interaction was limited to professional courtesy and carefully maintained boundaries. Margaret Wheeler was waiting at her desk with a stack of invoices and an expression that suggested news Madeline wasn't going to like. "Good morning, Margaret." "Madeline." Margaret's tone was carefully neutral. "We need to talk. My office, when you have a moment." The phrase, "when you have a moment," in Margaret's vocabulary meant immediately. So Madeline followed her supervisor down the hallway with growing apprehension. Margaret's office was functional and organized, decorated with photos of her grandchildren and motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. "Close the door, please." Madeline complied, noting how Margaret's usual warmth had been replaced by professional distance. "I received an interesting phone call this weekend," Margaret began, settling behind her desk with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for an unpleasant conversation. "From Eleanor Hartwell." The name meant nothing to Madeline, but Margaret's expression suggested it should. "Eleanor sits on several charity boards, including the Children's Hospital. She was at Saturday night's gala." Understanding dawned like cold water. Madeline felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. "She mentioned seeing you there with Charles Campbell. Dancing, talking intimately, leaving together for the terrace." Margaret's voice remained carefully modulated. She was quite concerned about what appeared to be a very personal relationship between the company's CEO and a member of the administrative staff. "Margaret, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because Eleanor's call was followed by one from Janet Morrison. You remember the Morrison account we've been cultivating?" Janet was also at the gala, and she expressed similar concerns about professional boundaries and company culture. Madeline sank into the chair across from Margaret's desk, feeling the fairy tale evening crumble into professional nightmare. "Are these women suggesting I did something inappropriate?" "They're suggesting that the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging as actual impropriety, that other employees might question whether your recent opportunities, the overtime projects, the involvement in the after-school program, the recommendation for the annual review bonus were based on merit or personal favoritism." Each word felt like a small knife. Madeline had worked so hard to maintain professional integrity, to prove her worth through competence and dedication. Now everything she'd accomplished was being filtered through the lens of gossip and assumption. "I've never asked Charles, Mr. Campbell, for any special treatment. But you've received it, haven't you? The debt assistance that mysteriously appeared, the after-school program that launched suspiciously quickly after your personal conversation with him, the gala invitation that came from nowhere. You knew about the debt payment." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I suspected. Charles isn't as subtle as he thinks when it comes to helping people. The question is, what happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that Eleanor Hartwell has influence with our board of directors. Janet Morrison represents a significant client relationship, and while I personally believe you're an exemplary employee who deserves every opportunity you've received, perception matters in the corporate world." "So, what are you saying?" Margaret leaned forward, her tone becoming more personal and less managerial. "I'm saying that you need to decide what's more important, your job security or your personal relationship with Charles Campbell, because in this environment, you probably can't have both." The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Madeline felt the walls of Margaret's office closing in, the carefully constructed stability of her professional life, threatened by one evening of honesty and connection. Does Charles know about these calls? Not yet. But he will soon enough. Eleanor Hartwell isn't known for her discretion, and Janet Morrison is meeting with him Thursday about the next phase of their contract. Madeline stood on unsteady legs, her mind racing through implications and possibilities, none of them good. "What would you do, Margaret, if you were me?" Margaret's smile was sad and knowing. "Honey, I'd probably do exactly what you're going to do. And I'd probably regret it for the rest of my life." Charles Campbell discovered the power of gossip's gravitational pull Tuesday morning when Emma entered his office with the expression that combined professional discretion with barely contained concern. "We have a situation," she announced, closing the door behind her with deliberate finality. "Now, what kind of situation?" "The kind that involves Saturday night's gala, social media, and Eleanor Hartwell's talent for creating drama where none existed before." Charles set down his coffee, giving Emma his full attention. "Explain." Eleanor posted photos from the gala on her Instagram account. Multiple shots of the event, including one of you and Madeline dancing, that she captioned with some pointed commentary about interesting new developments in Seattle's business community. Emma placed her tablet on his desk, displaying the offending post. The image was elegant. Madeline looked radiant in the sapphire gown, while Charles appeared more relaxed than usual. To anyone who didn't know the context, it looked like exactly what it was: two people enjoying each other's company at a charity event. But Eleanor's caption transformed innocence into innuendo. "CEO Charles Campbell and mystery date at Children's Hospital Gala. Sources suggest the lovely lady is an employee. How wonderfully modern of Seattle's elite to embrace workplace romance. Gala life. Power couples. Interesting developments. How many followers does she have? 12,000, including several board members, major clients, and business journalists." Charles scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening with each passive-aggressive observation and speculative question. The internet had transformed a private moment into public entertainment. "There's more," Emma continued reluctantly. "Janet Morrison called this morning. She wants to move up Thursday's meeting to discuss company culture and professional standards as they relate to the Morrison account. She wants to discuss my personal life as it relates to her business contract." Apparently, yes. She mentioned concerns about leadership integrity and whether Campbell and Associates maintains appropriate professional boundaries. Charles stood and moved to his window, studying the city below while processing the implications. In 32 floors below, Madeline was probably facing similar scrutiny, but without his resources or institutional protection. What else? Margaret Wheeler requested a meeting this afternoon. She seemed concerned about staff morale and professional development opportunities, meaning she's concerned about Madeline's position here. That would be my interpretation. Charles turned back to Emma, who had worked for him long enough to recognize the particular stillness that preceded decisive action. Schedule the Morrison meeting for tomorrow instead of Thursday. And get me a meeting with HR about company policies regarding employee relationships. Charles, you should know that HR policies are typically more restrictive than accommodating when it comes to supervisor-subordinate relationships. Then we'll need to find creative solutions. Emma hesitated, then asked the question Charles could see forming. Is this serious? Your relationship with Madeline? The directness of the inquiry made Charles pause. Emma had earned the right to such questions through years of professional loyalty and personal discretion. Yes, he said simply, it's serious. Serious enough to risk negative publicity and client relationships. Serious enough to find ways to protect both her career and our relationship. After Emma left, Charles found himself unable to concentrate on quarterly projections or merger documentation. Instead, he kept thinking about Madeline's comment on the terrace. When this ends, I'm the one who loses everything. She'd been right, of course. He had resources, connections, the kind of institutional power that allowed him to weather gossip and client complaints. She had a job she needed, a son to support, and a professional reputation that could be destroyed by association with him. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother's number. David, Charlie, you magnificent bastard. I just saw Eleanor Hartwell's Instagram post. And you're dating someone who looks like an actual human being instead of a corporate mannequin. I'm proud of you. It's complicated. The best relationships usually are. Who is she? Charles found himself explaining Madeline's situation, the single motherhood, the financial struggles he'd helped resolve, the gradual development of feelings that had culminated in Saturday night's revelation. So you're in love with your employee who doesn't know you paid off her debts until recently, and now Seattle society is gossiping about your relationship. That's a crude but accurate summary. Charlie, you realize you're living in a romance novel, right? All you need is a dramatic gesture and a happily ever after. Life isn't a romance novel, David. No, but sometimes it could use better plot development. What are you going to do? Charles looked out at the city again, thinking about Tyler's dragon stories and Madeline's quiet strength and the way she'd looked at him when she realized he'd been helping her all along. I'm going to figure out how to protect what matters most. Some problems, he was learning, required more than money to solve. The after-school program had become Tyler's favorite part of the day, but Wednesday afternoon found him unusually subdued as he worked on his latest dragon story. Sarah noticed the change in his typical enthusiasm and settled beside him at the homework table. Everything okay, Tyler? You seem quiet today. Tyler looked up from his notebook, his 8-year-old face serious with adult concerns. Can I ask you something private? Of course. If someone's mom is dating someone important, does that make the someone important bad? Sarah blinked, recognizing the complexity hidden in Tyler's simple question. That's a very grown-up question. Can you tell me why you're asking? Because Mom seems worried about something. She keeps checking her phone and making that face she makes when bills come in the mail. And Mrs. Chen said some ladies at the grocery store were talking about Mom and Mr. Campbell going to a fancy party together. Sarah felt her heart sink. Office gossip was one thing, but when it reached the level of neighborhood speculation, the situation had escalated beyond professional concerns. What did these ladies say? Mrs. Chen wouldn't tell me exactly, but she looked angry. She said some people have small minds and big mouths. Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. Is Mr. Campbell in trouble because he likes my mum? Before Sarah could formulate an age-appropriate response, Charles Campbell himself appeared in the doorway. Tyler's face brightened immediately, though Sarah noticed the tension around Charles's eyes. Mr. Campbell, I'm writing about a dragon who collects books instead of gold. Want to hear about it? I'd love to, but first, could I talk to Sarah for a moment? Tyler nodded and returned to his story with the focused concentration that characterized all his projects. Charles and Sarah moved to the corner of the room where their conversation couldn't be overheard. How is he handling the situation? Charles asked quietly. He's heard gossip. Not details, but enough to know that people are talking about his mother and you. Sarah kept her voice low, but her tone direct. He's worried about whether you're in trouble. Charles's expression tightened. What about Madeline? How is she managing this? She seems stressed, more than usual. And she mentioned that she might need to find alternative after-school arrangements for Tyler. Why? She didn't say explicitly, but I think she's concerned about appearances, about whether Tyler being in a program you funded creates additional complications. Charles looked across the room at Tyler, who was now sketching dragons in the margins of his story with absorbed concentration. The boy represented everything that made this situation more than a simple corporate romance. Innocence, vulnerability, the kind of collateral damage that occurred when adult complications spilled into children's lives. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens between Madeline and me professionally, Tyler's place in this program is secure. This is his space, regardless of any other circumstances. I appreciate that, but if his mother pulls him out, she won't have to. I'll make sure of that. Their conversation was interrupted by Tyler's excited voice. Mr. Campbell, come see what I wrote. Charles moved to Tyler's table, genuinely interested, despite the weight of corporate complications pressing on his shoulders. Tyler's story had evolved from simple dragon tales into complex narratives about misunderstood creatures who protected things they loved. This dragon's name is Aurelius, Tyler explained, pointing to his latest drawing. He guards a library full of stories about families who found each other in unexpected ways. But the townspeople think he's dangerous because he's different from what they expect. What makes them change their minds? Well, that's the problem. I haven't figured out the ending yet. Tyler looked up with the serious expression that made him seem older than his 8 years. How do you convince people to stop being afraid of something they don't understand? The question hit Charles with unexpected force. Tyler was writing about dragons, but he was also processing the adult world's reaction to his mother's relationship, trying to understand why people might disapprove of something that made his mother happy. Well, that's a very wise question, Tyler. I think the answer might be showing them that love makes people better, not worse. Is that what happens in real life too? It's what should happen. Tyler considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. Mom says that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Your mom is very smart. I know. That's why I don't understand why some people think she's not good enough for important people. She's the best person I know. The innocent defense of his mother's worth hit Charles like a physical blow. Tyler had absorbed enough adult conversation to understand that his mother's value was being questioned, but not enough to understand why. Tyler, your mother is good enough for anyone. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even if they're really rich and important, especially then. Some truths, Charles realized, were simple enough for 8-year-olds to understand, even when adults made them complicated. Thursday's meeting with Janet Morrison unfolded exactly as Charles had anticipated, and worse than he'd hoped. The Morrison Group's conference room felt more like a tribunal than a business discussion, with Janet presiding over a gathering that included her Chief Operating Officer, General Counsel, and Director of Public Relations. "Charles, I've always appreciated Campbell and Associates' professionalism," Janet began, her tone carrying the chill of corporate disapproval. "That's why I'm concerned about recent developments that might impact our working relationship." "What developments specifically?" "The photos from Saturday's gala have been circulating on social media. Our communications team monitors online mentions of our business partners, and we've noted some interesting commentary about your personal relationships." Charles kept his expression neutral, despite the surge of anger at having his private life dissected by corporate communications teams. "My personal life has no bearing on Campbell and Associates, whose ability to serve your account, doesn't it?" Janet's COO leaned forward, consulting notes that suggested this conversation had been carefully choreographed. "Adult, when clients see their service provider's CEO publicly involved with subordinate employees, it raises questions about judgment, professional boundaries, and company culture. It raises questions about whether workplace relationships compromise decision-making," added the General Counsel. "Whether favoritism influences personnel decisions, contract negotiations, or strategic planning." Charles recognized the coordinated attack for what it was, an ultimatum disguised as corporate concern. "Are you questioning the quality of our work for Morrison Group?" "Not the quality, no, but we are questioning whether the circumstances surrounding your relationship create liability issues for both our companies." Janet reclaimed control of the conversation with practiced efficiency. "Charles, we value our partnership, but Morrison Group has a responsibility to our shareholders to ensure that our business relationships reflect appropriate professional standards." "And what would constitute appropriate professional standards in your view?" "Clear separation between personal relationships and business operations, transparent hiring and promotion practices, management structures that eliminate potential conflicts of interest." The message was clear without being explicitly stated. "End the relationship or lose the account." "I see." Charles stood, signaling his intention to conclude the meeting. "I appreciate your candor, Janet. I'll need time to consider how Campbell and Associates chooses to address these concerns." "Of course. But Charles?" Janet's smile was sharp and unforgiving. "Time is a luxury that public companies can't always afford." 2 hours later, Charles sat in his office with HR Director Patricia Williams, reviewing company policies that felt increasingly like legal landmines. "The handbook is clear about supervisor-subordinate relationships," Patricia explained, spreading policy documents across his desk. "And they're not prohibited, but they require disclosure, potential reassignment, and ongoing oversight to prevent conflicts of interest." "What would reassignment look like in this case?" "Typically, the subordinate employee would transfer to a different department or division, eliminating the direct reporting relationship." "And if no equivalent position exists in other departments?" Patricia's pause was telling. "That becomes more complicated." "Meaning?" "Meaning that administrative positions are generally department-specific. Madeline's skills and experience might not translate to other areas of the company." Charles stared at the policy documents, seeing Madeline's career reduced to bureaucratic complications and risk management strategies. What if the supervisor removed himself from the equation instead? "I'm not sure I understand. What if I stepped back from day-to-day operations, created structural separation between my position and hers?" Patricia looked genuinely confused. "Charles, you're the CEO. You can't just step back. The board would have questions. Shareholders would demand explanations. So the only viable solution is for her to leave." "It's the most straightforward solution." "Yes." That evening, Charles found himself driving to Madeline's apartment complex without conscious decision. He sat in his car outside the modest building, watching lights flicker on in windows that represented lives he could barely imagine. Families managing on careful budgets, children doing homework at kitchen tables, the quiet dramas of people who measured success in stability rather than acquisition. His phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. "Tyler has a soccer game Saturday morning if you'd like to come. No pressure, just thought you might enjoy it." The invitation was casual, friendly, completely unaware of the corporate machinations that had consumed his day. She was still thinking about normal relationship milestones, meeting her son's friends, sharing weekend activities, building the kind of domestic connections that Charles had never prioritized. But Saturday's soccer game felt impossibly distant from Thursday's ultimatums and policy discussions. How could he explain that watching Tyler play soccer might cost them both everything they'd worked to build? Charles started his car and drove toward his empty penthouse, carrying the weight of choices that seemed designed to ensure that everyone lost something precious. Some problems, he was discovering, couldn't be solved with money, influence, or strategic thinking. Some problems demanded sacrifices that left permanent scars. Friday afternoon arrived with the finality of an execution. Madeline had been summoned to Margaret's office at precisely 3 o'clock, and the carefully neutral expression on her supervisor's face suggested that whatever conversation was coming would end her employment at Campbell and Associates. "Please, sit down." Margaret's tone was professionally gentle, the voice of someone delivering bad news with practiced compassion. Madeline settled into the familiar chair across from Margaret's desk, noting the HR folder placed prominently between them. Her personnel file, probably, containing 2 years of positive performance reviews that were apparently insufficient armor against social media gossip and client pressure. "I'll be direct because you deserve honesty," Margaret began. "The company has received multiple complaints about your relationship with Charles Campbell. Clients are questioning our professional standards, board members are concerned about liability issues, and HR has determined that the situation requires immediate resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "Your resignation, effective immediately." The words hit like physical blows, each syllable dismantling the careful stability she'd built for herself and Tyler. Madeline felt her vision narrow, her breathing become shallow as the implications cascaded through her mind. "And Margaret, please, I understand there are complications, but this job, I need this job. Tyler depends on this job. I know, honey, and if the decision were mine alone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But Eleanor Hartwell has connections to 3 board members. Janet Morrison represents 15% of our annual revenue. When clients threaten to take their business elsewhere, so I'm being fired because I attended a charity gala with Charles. You're being offered the opportunity to resign to avoid formal termination proceedings that would make finding new employment more difficult." The distinction felt meaningless. Resignation or termination, the result was identical. No job, no health insurance, no steady income to support Tyler's needs. What about the after-school program? And Tyler's care? Tyler can finish out the week, but the program is designed for employees' children. Another blow. Not only would she lose her income, but Tyler would lose the stability and educational support that had become integral to his routine. "Does Charles know about this?" Margaret's expression grew carefully neutral. "Mr. Campbell has been informed of the concerns raised by clients and board members. The decision regarding your employment was made by HR and executive management, without his input. With his understanding of the situation's complexity." The careful phrasing suggested that Charles had been presented with similar ultimatums. Choose between his company's stability and his relationship with her, and he'd chosen the company. Of course he had. A struggling single mother couldn't compete with multinational business relationships and shareholder expectations. She'd been naive to think otherwise. How much severance? 2 weeks pay, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and positive references for future employment opportunities. Madeline calculated quickly. 2 weeks' salary would cover rent and basic expenses for 1 month, maybe 2 if she was extraordinarily careful. The health insurance extension would protect Tyler until she found new coverage, assuming she found new employment quickly. I need to clean out my desk. Of course, security will escort you, per company policy. The walk from Margaret's office to her desk felt eternal, marked by curious stares from colleagues who'd probably already heard about her termination through office gossip networks. Madeline packed her personal items, Tyler's photograph, the small succulent, a coffee mug he'd given her for Mother's Day, into a cardboard box that seemed to mock the insignificance of her professional presence. Her computer had already been remotely locked, her access badges deactivated, her corporate existence efficiently erased. "Ma'am?" The security guard was polite, but firm. "I'll need to escort you to the lobby." The elevator ride down 32 floors provided unwelcome time to process what had just happened. 2 years of reliable service, months of growing connection with Charles, weeks of hope that maybe her life could expand beyond survival mode, all reduced to a cardboard box and a security escort. In the lobby, she paused at the reception desk where Sarah offered a sympathetic smile. "Madeline, I'm so sorry. This is completely unfair. Please tell Tyler I'll pick him up from the program as usual. Today will be his last day." "Of course. And Madeline, don't let them convince you this is about professional standards. This is about people who can't stand seeing others find happiness." Outside, Seattle's afternoon bustle continued with indifferent normalcy. Madeline sat in her car in the parking garage, staring at the cardboard box containing the remnants of her corporate life, and allowed herself 5 minutes of tears before she had to drive home and explain to Tyler why their carefully constructed stability had just collapsed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charles. "I'm so sorry, this isn't over." But it felt very much over. Fairy tales didn't survive corporate boardrooms and client ultimatums. Cinderella's coach had turned back into a pumpkin, and the ball was definitely finished. Some stories, Madeline realized, didn't get happy endings. They just got different kinds of endings, and learning to live with disappointment was another skill single mothers mastered out of necessity. The silence in Charles Campbell's penthouse apartment felt suffocating. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at Elliott Bay, while Friday evening bled into Seattle's urban twilight. But the panoramic view that had once represented achievement now felt like isolation made manifest. His phone lay silent on the coffee table. No calls from Madeline, no responses to his texts. She'd been escorted from the building 4 hours ago while he sat in back-to-back meetings with lawyers and board members, discussing damage control and corporate liability as if her termination were a strategic necessity rather than a personal catastrophe. The scotch in his hand tasted like sawdust. Everything in his carefully curated life, the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the awards and accolades that documented his professional ascent, felt like props in someone else's story. A story about a man who'd accumulated wealth and power, but lost track of what made either worthwhile. His laptop displayed the quarterly reports that had dominated his attention for 2 years, numbers that proved Campbell and Associates was more profitable than ever. But profit felt meaningless when measured against what he'd allowed to slip away. The door chimed with the building's security system announcing a visitor. Charles checked the video feed, surprised to see his brother David standing in the lobby. "Let him up," Charles told the concierge through the intercom. David arrived 15 minutes later with a bottle of wine and an expression that combined sympathy with barely contained frustration. "Heard about the corporate execution," David said, settling into the leather chair opposite Charles's position by the windows. "I want to talk about it, or should I just drink your expensive liquor while you brood dramatically? She lost her job because of me. She lost her job because your clients are sanctimonious hypocrites, and your board members are cowards." Same result. David poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and studied his older brother with the directness that had characterized their relationship since childhood. "So what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" Janet Morrison threatened to pull the account. Eleanor Hartwell has connections to half the board. HR documented multiple client complaints about professional standards and workplace relationships. "That's what you can't do. I asked what you're going to do." Charles turned from the window, noting David's expression, patient but determined, like someone prepared to have a difficult conversation that couldn't be avoided. "I don't understand the difference. The difference is between reacting to other people's limitations and deciding what actually matters to you." David leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. "Charlie, when Mum was dying, what did she tell you?" The question hit unexpectedly, dragging up memories Charles had carefully compartmentalized. Margaret Campbell's final weeks, spent in the same children's hospital where Saturday's gala had been held, where she'd volunteered for 15 years. She said a lot of things. She said that success without love was just elaborate loneliness. She said that the measure of a life wasn't what you accumulated, but what you gave and who you loved. Charles remembered those conversations in the hospital room, his mother's voice growing weaker but her convictions becoming clearer, her insistence that he find someone who saw him as a person rather than a balance sheet. She also said that fear makes cowards of everyone, but love makes heroes of ordinary people. And what are you being right now, Charlie? A coward or a hero? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Charles had built his empire by taking calculated risks, by making bold decisions when others hesitated. But when it came to protecting what mattered most, he'd chosen safety over courage. "It's not that simple, David. I have responsibilities, employees, shareholders, clients who depend on the company's stability. And what about your responsibility to the woman you love, to the 8-year-old boy who thinks you're some kind of superhero?" Tyler. Charles hadn't allowed himself to think about Tyler since the termination, but now the boy's image filled his mind. Serious brown eyes, dragon stories about misunderstood creatures, the innocent question about whether important people were too good for regular people. "Tyler asked me how to convince people to stop being afraid of something they don't understand," Charles said quietly. "Smart kid. What did you tell him?" "That love makes people better, not worse." "Do you believe that?" Charles considered the question, thinking about the months since he'd first heard Madeline crying in the empty office, how her presence had made him want to be kinder, more generous, more connected to the people around him, rather than just the profits they generated. "Yes, then prove it." David finished his scotch and stood, moving toward the door with the decisive movements of someone who'd accomplished his purpose. "Where are you going?" "Home to my wife and kids, the family that makes everything else worthwhile." He paused at the door. "You know what Mom would say if she could see you right now?" "What?" "That you're sitting in an expensive tower feeling sorry for yourself, while the best thing that ever happened to you is probably wondering if she was right about fairy tales not being real." After David left, Charles remained at the window as Seattle's lights flickered on below him. Somewhere in those lights was a small apartment where Madeline was probably explaining to Tyler why their life was about to change again, why stability was more fragile than they'd hoped. Some nights demanded more than brooding. Some nights demanded the kind of courage his mother had tried to teach him. Saturday morning found Charles Campbell in an unusual location, the youth soccer fields of Lincoln Park, where 8-year-old boys and girls chased dreams and soccer balls with equal determination. He sat in his BMW in the parking lot, watching Tyler Johnson warm up with his teammates while Madeline stood on the sidelines, her posture carrying the weight of yesterday's termination. She looked exhausted but determined, the expression of someone who'd spent a sleepless night figuring out how to rebuild her life yet again. Even from this distance, Charles could see the careful way she interacted with other parents, friendly but guarded, as if anticipating judgment or withdrawal once word spread about her circumstances. Tyler spotted him first, breaking away from his warm-up to wave enthusiastically before running back to his team. The boy's uncomplicated joy at seeing him there made Charles's chest tighten with emotions he couldn't easily categorize. Madeline followed Tyler's gaze and saw Charles sitting in his car. For a moment, their eyes met across the parking lot, and he saw surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope before she turned back to the field. Charles's phone rang. Emma. Charles, I know you said no calls this weekend, but we have a situation. The Morrison Group issued a press release this morning announcing they're expanding their account with Hartwell and Associates effective immediately. The news should have felt like a catastrophic blow. Losing the Morrison account would impact quarterly revenues significantly. Instead, Charles felt something like relief. How much of our business are they taking? All of it, complete transfer, effective Monday morning. I see. Anything else? Janet Morrison's assistant called to schedule a meeting for Monday. She wants to discuss transition logistics and, I quote, ensuring appropriate professional boundaries are maintained during the handover. Cancel the meeting. I'm sorry. Cancel it. And Emma, clear my schedule for Monday morning. I need to make some calls. After hanging up, Charles remained in his car, watching Tyler's soccer game unfold with the chaotic energy of 8-year-olds discovering their athletic potential. The boy played with focused intensity, clearly inheriting his mother's determination along with her smile. At halftime, Tyler ran to the sidelines where Madeline waited with water and encouragement. Charles watched their interaction, the easy affection, the way Madeline's entire demeanor softened when she focused on her son, Tyler's animated explanation of his near goal in the first half. This was what he'd been fighting for, Charles realized. Not just a relationship with Madeline, but entry into this world where success was measured in soccer goals and bedtime stories rather than quarterly profits and client retention rates. His phone buzzed with a text from David. Hope you're not still wallowing in expensive scotch and self-pity. Charles typed back, I'm at Tyler's soccer game. Now we're talking. What's the plan? Charles looked across the field at Madeline, who was cheering as Tyler's team lined up for the second half. She'd chosen to attend her son's game, despite having her life dismantled less than 24 hours ago. She was teaching Tyler that some commitments mattered more than personal catastrophes. I'm going to fix this, he typed. How? Charles thought about his mother's hospital room conversations, about Tyler's dragon stories, about the look in Madeline's eyes when she'd accused him of thinking money could solve everything. Maybe money couldn't solve everything, but it could create possibilities when used correctly. By remembering what actually matters, he typed back. During the game's final minutes, Tyler scored his first goal of the season, a perfectly timed kick that sent the ball sailing past the goalkeeper into the net. The celebration was immediate and joyous, teammates mobbing Tyler while parents cheered from the sidelines. Charles found himself out of his car, applauding with genuine enthusiasm for a boy who'd become important to him in ways that transcended professional complications or social expectations. Tyler looked toward the parking lot, spotted Charles clapping, and his smile became even brighter. He pointed excitedly to his mother, ensuring she saw that Charles had witnessed his moment of triumph. Madeline's expression was complex. Gratitude for Charles's presence mixed with confusion about what his attendance meant given their current circumstances. After the game, Charles approached them as Tyler collected his equipment bag. "Congratulations on the goal," Charles said. "Yeah, that was an excellent shot. Thanks. Did you see how I faked left but kicked right? Coach says that's called strategy. Very good strategy." Madeline watched this exchange with careful neutrality. "Charles, what are you doing here?" "Learning about what matters most," he said simply, "and figuring out how to fight for it." Tyler looked between the two adults, his 8-year-old radar detecting undercurrents he couldn't fully understand. "Are you going to help Mom find a new job?" Tyler asked with characteristic directness. Charles met Madeline's eyes, seeing the future he wanted reflected in her guarded hope. "I'm going to do better than that," he said. "I'm going to make sure she doesn't need one." Monday morning arrived with the electric tension of revolution. Charles Campbell sat in the Campbell and Associates boardroom at exactly 8 o'clock, facing 7 board members who'd gathered for what they believed would be a damage control meeting about client relations and corporate reputation management. Instead, they were about to witness the systematic dismantling of everything they thought they understood about their CEO's priorities. "Gentlemen, ladies," Charles began, his tone carrying the calm authority that had built his empire. "I've called this meeting to discuss the future direction of Campbell and Associates, specifically as it relates to our corporate values and leadership structure." Board Chair Harrison Blackwood leaned forward with the entitled confidence of old money and older prejudices. "Charles, if this is about the Morrison situation, we're prepared to discuss strategies for rebuilding that relationship. The Morrison situation is closed. They've transferred their business to Hartwell and Associates, effective today." The room erupted in concerned murmurs, but Charles continued without acknowledging the interruption. "Indeed, what I want to discuss is how this company chooses to define success and whether our current definition aligns with the values I want to represent." Eleanor Hartwell's brother-in-law, board member Richmond Hayes, cleared his throat. "Charles, losing the Morrison account is a significant revenue impact. We need to focus on damage control and client retention, not philosophical discussions about corporate values." "On the contrary," Charles replied, "philosophical discussions about corporate values are exactly what we need. Because the events of the past week have clarified something important. I'm no longer interested in building a company that sacrifices good people to appease small-minded clients." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Charles had their complete attention now. "I'm announcing my intention to restructure Campbell and Associates as a hybrid profit and social impact organization. 50% of our annual profits will be dedicated to the Margaret Campbell Foundation, which will provide comprehensive support services for single-parent families facing financial hardship." Board member Patricia Grimsby, who'd been silent until now, spoke with ice-cold precision. Charles, you can't unilaterally restructure the company's profit distribution. The board has fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders." "You're absolutely right, which is why I'm also announcing my intention to buy out all current shareholders at a premium rate of 30% above current market value." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles had just proposed to purchase complete ownership of his own company, transforming it from a profit-driven corporation into his personal vehicle for social change. That would require approximately $40 million in immediate capital, Harrison said slowly. $42 million to be precise. "I've already secured the financing." Charles had spent Sunday evening liquidating investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and personal assets that had taken 20 years to accumulate. By Monday morning, He'd assembled enough liquid capital to purchase complete control of his own company. "This is financial suicide," Richmond declared. "You're destroying everything you've built for a romantic relationship that will probably end within 6 months. "You're wrong about the timeline," Charles said calmly. "But you're right that I'm changing everything I've built. Because what I built was hollow success that impressed people I don't respect while isolating me from everything that actually matters." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Charles with new understanding. "Dee, this is about more than the Johnson woman, isn't it? Her name is Madeline, and yes, it's about more than her, though she's a significant part of it. It's about creating a company that supports families instead of exploiting their vulnerabilities. It's about using success to lift people up rather than just accumulating more success." "What about employee positions?" Harrison asked. "If you're restructuring this dramatically, every current employee will be offered equivalent positions in the new structure, with improved benefits and family support services. No one loses their job because I'm choosing to operate differently." Charles stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "I'll have legal documents prepared for your review by Wednesday. You have until Friday to decide whether to accept my buyout offer or remain as minority shareholders in a company that operates under new principles." As the board members filed out in various states of shock and indignation, Charles remained in the conference room, looking out at the city where somewhere Madeline was probably sending out resumes and Tyler was wondering why his after-school program had ended so abruptly. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "The Johnson family is here to see you. Should I send them up?" Charles smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. Some revolutions began with grand gestures, but the best ones began with people who mattered showing up when you needed them most. "Send them up," he replied. "And Emma, clear my schedule for the rest of the day. I have a family to build." Madeline Johnson stood in the elevator ascending to Charles Campbell's office, holding Tyler's hand while her mind raced through the implications of what Emma had told her downstairs. Charles wanted to see them both. He had something important to discuss. The corporate buyout was already making news in Seattle's business community. "Mom, are you nervous?" Tyler asked, studying her face with his characteristic perceptiveness. "A little," she admitted, "but sometimes being nervous means something important is about to happen." "Good important or bad important?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart." The elevator doors opened to reveal Emma waiting with a smile that suggested good important. "He's waiting in his office," Emma said warmly. "And Tyler?" "He's very excited to see you." They walked down the familiar hallway, the same path Madeline had taken dozens of times as an employee, but now she felt like a visitor in a world that had briefly seemed accessible before revealing its true barriers. Charles's office door was open. He stood by his windows, but turned immediately when they entered. His expression was softer than she'd seen it, vulnerable in a way that made her heart stutter despite her careful emotional defenses. "Tyler, Madeline, thank you for coming." "Mr. Campbell!" Tyler broke away from his mother's hand and ran toward Charles with 8-year-old enthusiasm. "Emma said, you bought your whole company. Does that mean you're like a king now?" Charles laughed, the sound genuine and relaxed. "Not exactly a king, more like someone who decided to change how his kingdom operates." "Why?" The question was simple, direct, and Charles answered it by looking directly at Madeline. "Because I realized that having power means nothing if you don't use it to protect the people you love." Madeline felt her breath catch. The word love hung in the air between them, carrying weight that couldn't be dismissed as corporate politeness or charitable sympathy. "Charles, what's this about? Emma mentioned a corporate restructure, but sit down, please." "Both of you." They settled on the couch that faced his desk. Tyler perched on the edge with excitement, while Madeline maintained careful composure. "I've made some changes," Charles began. "Campbell and Associates is becoming a social impact organization dedicated to supporting single-parent families. The Margaret Campbell Foundation will provide comprehensive assistance, financial support, job training, childcare services, educational opportunities. That's amazing, Madeline said carefully, but I'm not sure why you wanted to tell us personally, because I want you to run it. The offer hit like lightning. Madeline stared at Charles, certain she'd misunderstood. You want me to what? I want you to be the foundation's executive director. You understand the challenges single parents face because you've lived them. You know what kind of support actually helps, because you know what it feels like to need help. Tyler looked between them with growing excitement. Mom, does that mean you get to help other families like ours? Madeline struggled to process the magnitude of what Charles was proposing. Charles, I'm grateful, but I can't accept a job created specifically for me. That's exactly the kind of favoritism that— This isn't favoritism, Charles interrupted gently. This is me recognizing that the most qualified person to help struggling families is someone who's successfully navigated those struggles herself. He moved to his desk and returned with a folder containing what appeared to be formal job descriptions and organizational charts. The foundation will have an annual budget of $12 million. You'd oversee a staff of 25 people, providing services to approximately 1,500 families annually. The position requires someone with administrative experience, personal understanding of single-parent challenges, and the ability to build programs that actually work instead of just looking good on charity board reports. Madeline opened the folder, seeing her life struggles transformed into professional qualifications, her experiences reframed as expertise rather than evidence of failure. The salary is competitive with executive non-profit positions, Charles continued. Health insurance, retirement benefits, and flexible scheduling that accommodates Tyler's needs. This is really real, Tyler asked, his voice filled with wonder. Mom would get to help other kids whose mums worry about money. Yes, Charles said, but his eyes remained on Madeline. If she says yes. Madeline looked at the organizational charts, the program descriptions, the vision of transforming her personal struggles into professional purpose. It was everything she could have dreamed of: meaningful work, financial security, the opportunity to help others navigate challenges she understood intimately. But underneath the professional opportunity lay a more personal question. And us, she asked quietly. What happens to us? Charles moved closer. Close enough that Tyler could hear, but his words were clearly meant for her. That depends on whether you believe fairy tales can have real-world endings. What do you mean? I mean that I love you, Madeline Johnson. I love your strength, your integrity, your determination to build a good life for Tyler despite every obstacle. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that some stories do get happy endings. Tyler's gasp was audible. Mum, he said he loves you. I heard him, sweetheart. Are you going to say it back? Some questions, Madeline realized, deserved honest answers. Yes, she whispered, looking into Charles's eyes. I love you too. 18 months later, the wedding ceremony took place in the same children's hospital garden where Margaret Campbell had once read stories to young patients. It was a small gathering, Tyler as ring bearer, Mrs. Chen dabbing tears with a tissue, Emma serving as Madeline's maid of honor, David standing as Charles's best man, and a handful of close friends who understood that the most meaningful celebrations focused on love rather than spectacle. Madeline wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit perfectly and carrying the weight of family history and new beginnings. Charles stood beneath an arch of white roses, his expression carrying the wonder of someone who discovered that the best investments were emotional rather than financial. Tyler, the minister said warmly, I understand you have something special to share. Tyler stepped forward with the serious demeanor he brought to important occasions, carrying not just the wedding rings, but also a folder containing legal documents that would transform him from Madeline's son to their son. "I wrote something," Tyler announced, his 8-year-old voice carrying across the small gathering. "It's about dragons and families, and how sometimes the best stories are the ones that start sad but end happy." He cleared his throat with ceremonial importance and began reading from a carefully handwritten page. "Once upon a time, there was a dragon who lived alone in a tall tower. He had lots of treasure, but he was lonely because he thought his treasure was more important than having friends. Then one day, he heard someone crying, and instead of ignoring it, he decided to help. When he helped, he discovered that sharing treasure made it more valuable, not less. And the person he helped wasn't afraid of dragons like other people were, because she could see that his heart was good, even though he looked scary from the outside." Tyler paused, looking up at Charles and his mother with satisfaction at his storytelling skills. The dragon and the person became a family, and they used their treasure to help other families who needed help. And they lived happily ever after, because they learned that love makes everything better, even dragons. The small gathering erupted in applause and laughter, while Charles found himself blinking back tears at Tyler's wisdom wrapped in 8-year-old metaphor. "Tyler," the minister continued, "would you like to present the adoption papers along with the rings?" Tyler nodded solemnly, approaching Charles with documents that had been months in preparation. "Mr. Campbell, Dad, these papers say you're officially my father now, not just Mom's husband." Charles knelt to Tyler's level, accepting both the rings and the adoption papers with hands that trembled slightly. "Audrey Tyler Campbell," he said softly, "I promise to be the best father I can be for as long as you'll have me." "Forever," Tyler replied with characteristic certainty, "because that's how families work." The ceremony concluded with exchanges of rings and vows that promised partnership, love, and commitment to building something larger than individual happiness. When Charles kissed his new wife, Tyler cheered with enthusiasm that made the entire gathering laugh through their tears. 3 hours later, the reception took place in the Margaret Campbell Foundation's new headquarters, a converted warehouse space that buzzed with the energy of meaningful work. Program coordinators mingled with board members, foundation clients shared stories with donors, and Tyler showed off his new father to anyone who would listen. Madeline stood near the windows overlooking the foundation's child care center, where 23 children played under professional supervision while their parents attended job training sessions or met with financial counselors. The scene represented everything she'd dreamed of during those long nights when bills outnumbered income and hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Many regrets?" Charles appeared beside her, following her gaze to the children's laughter drifting through the windows. "About marrying you or starting the foundation?" "Either. Both." Madeline considered the question seriously, thinking about the path that had led from crying alone in an empty office to standing in a space dedicated to helping families build better futures. "The only regret I have is that it took so long for us to find each other." Charles wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching Tyler teaching younger children how to play his favorite game, a modified version of tag he'd invented, where everyone was a dragon protecting something precious. "What do you think he's protecting in that game?" Charles asked. "His family," Madeline answered without hesitation. "He's learned that the most important treasure isn't gold or money. It's the people who love you unconditionally." Through the windows, Tyler spotted them watching and waved enthusiastically before returning to his game of protective dragons and found families. Some stories began with tears and ended with laughter. Some fairy tales were built not from magic, but from people brave enough to believe that love could transform ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, happily ever after wasn't just a story ending, it was a beginning. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.